see. All right. So it's November 30th, 2020, and I'm Michael Naylor, and I'm tuning in here from a very wet and dark South Portland, Maine today, and have the pleasure of my friend David Hall being here, who I went through training at the Enneagram Institute with him through all of the training, and just a pleasure to be with him. He's always been an inspiration for me in terms of his zeal for growth and challenging himself in all sorts of ways. Yeah, but anyway, great to have you here, David.
Great to be here, Michael.
Yeah, and you're calling from
Port Townsend.
gorgeous area in Washington, right?
Yes, right
Yeah,
on the Olympic Peninsula.
awesome. So why don't what I'd love to have you do is just start in and talk about your journey as a type 6, when you discovered it, what it's been like for you, the agony and the ecstasy, whatever, and in between. So yeah, just jump right in.
Fair enough. I was first told about the Enneagram when I was in couples counseling with my first wife. And we had a therapist who knew the Enneagram, recommended it as a way we might be able to understand a lot of the conflicts and misunderstandings in our relationship. So I looked into that little yellow book. I believe it's called The Essential Enneagram, and read the 9 paragraphs about the types. And I gather this is somewhat rare among sixes, as we are famously considered to be indecisive. But I instantly recognized that's me. I'm a 6. And my first experience of that revelation was one of tremendous relief and a sense of being supported, a sense that I was not just a freak who, for some inexplicable reason, seemed to be more anxious than everyone around me and more self sabotaging than anyone around me. I was a type. I shared with millions of people a set of predispositions and challenges. So I found that tremendously comforting, validating, inspiring, as I realized this would give me a handle on how to work with my largely self-imposed suffering. I had realized that I mostly did this to myself. I just couldn't figure out why or how to stop it. So that was my introduction. And it wasn't too much longer before I realized I needed to actually go seek out a teacher. And that's when I met Russ Hudson and signed on for the training. And as you say, we went through that all together over a couple and a half years period there. And then, just to do like a before after picture, 20 years collapsed into a quick before and after. I feel now that my experience of being a 6 is not one of tremendous, crippling, omnipresent anxiety. There's, of course, the subtle existential hum that never quite goes away, the vigilance of what could go wrong here, what might be needing my attention. But mostly, my experience of myself as a 6 now is to embrace that part of my personality, which is so bound up in wanting to feel like I'm in a reciprocally supportive environment, so that in my relationships, I have your back, you have mine. I mean what I say, you mean what you say. We say what we mean, we follow through. And I've started to really realize what a gift it is to understand that that is really the foundational, emotional, existential thing that I need and that I can provide to other people.
Hmm.
So I would say I'm perfectly happy being a six right now. I don't have any sense of wishing I was a different type or wishing my type would go away or anything like that. So I have found the journey of learning within my type who I am, what can I contribute, what do I need, how do I tell people clearly what I need. I just think it's been a wonderful journey,
Awesome.
and
Well,
it's not over yet.
that's the rumor. There's so many new things to explore. So in that journey, I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, what helped you move from, being anxious and maybe preoccupied, caught in the pattern of the six to this place of clarity and groundedness and more state of inner peace and sanity. If you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about the journey you've taken.
I'd be happy to.
Awesome.
The most important thing that I learned fairly early on was if I could connect with the feeling of anxiety in my body as a energetic, organismic sensation or set of sensations. And I was lucky that I had a few years of Vipassana meditation under my belt. And so I had practiced locating the physical feeling of things and learning to stay with them with a kind of non-interfering awareness. And that was just hugely helpful because the feeling of anxiety before that would inevitably provoke this mental state, worrying, perseverating, catastrophizing, which in turn would make me more anxious, which in turn would amp up the mental activity, and I would spiral into this place so quickly. So when I learned to catch that, okay, there I go, anxious, worrying, catastrophizing. Let's just feel that energy in my body. And I would tend to feel it pretty much right in the solar plexus. And it would be a kind of moving, pulsating pressure kind of feeling. And after a while, I realized this feeling can't hurt me. This feeling in and of itself can't really make me do anything or think anything. And I even started to realize this feeling is once I've so it's a state of arousal. And really,
So
if I
David,
just did I cut out?
yeah, just I think the last two sentences there was an interference from a dark force. Uh,
Okay.
they don't want
So
they don't want the secret on healing the six to get out too quickly. So
there you go. Well, that would be the paranoid interpretation of it. I was probably saying something about just learning to focus in on the sensation itself.
Yeah, and you were saying that you realized that the sensation uh, wouldn't hurt you, and it couldn't make
Mhm.
you do things you didn't want to do, and that you somehow learned how to bear with it and observe it, and that
Yes.
that started to create a shift for you.
Yes, because the more I stayed with that feeling, the more I realized it wasn't even in and of itself a particularly unpleasant feeling. I realized that as a feeling, it actually was indistinguishable from the feeling I get in the solar plexus when I'm elated and eagerly anticipating something.
Hmm.
So I realized it was a state of arousal, a state of organismic arousal. And if I did not turn it into a problem, become afraid of the anxiety, think it meant I needed to worry about everything,
Hmm.
it really, in and of itself, it had no real power over me. So
Hmm.
that was the lever, I think. That was the Archimedean lever that really allowed me to move my world.
Well, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. I've had type 6 friends say that, sometimes they would wake up in the morning and the first thing that they would experience in their awareness was this sensation of anxiety
Yes,
and a little hint of something bad is coming, so I better find out what it is. And so they go into
yes,
their head center, of course, and of course, there's 1,000 things that could go wrong. And they said, and I would just attach whatever that thought was to the feeling, and then there I'd be sort of spinning that around, that terrible thing. And it
yes,
sounds like that whole process of sort of vacating the head center and really coming down into the sensation really helped to not get it tangled up with all sorts of fantasies of fear, which is not an easy thing to do, because sometimes sixes will say, or some have said, you know, when I have a fear thought, I take it seriously. It grabs my attention. Like I'm almost like obligated to find out what it is. It's just hypnotic. But training yourself, through Vipassana and your practices, it sounds like it really interrupted that kind of tangled response to anxiety or the exhilaration even that you feel.
yes. For many years, I woke up every morning exactly as you have just described. And that is no fun, let me tell you, to start your day
Yeah.
every day with that knot of anxiety and worry. So, yes, this process of learning how to go into my body and experience the anxiety feeling as a sensation and to work with it as a sensation, I would say over the course of several years, I really managed to forge a completely different relationship with my anxiety. But
Yeah.
it is hard work.
Yeah. You don't give it, it isn't given to you for free. That's for sure.
No, and that feeling that you reported that other sixes have told you of, I need to take this seriously, it's almost an obligation. That rings exactly true to my experience. Not
Hmm.
only would I have the feeling that once the anxious thought had started, I had to follow it, manage it, figure it out, chase it down every rabbit hole. I would even have the experience when, for a little bit of time, the anxiety and the worry ceased, and I would suddenly realize that. My first thought would be, oh my God, what am I forgetting to worry about? So the tyranny of that whole anxiety, worry, tangle, as you put it, can just be so painful.
Yeah, and that sense of, well, sort of in some of the inner critic work, the Sixes will say it's almost like my inner critic says, if I'm relaxed and at peace, I'm not prepared for the incoming emergency that will be here sooner than you realize. So if I worry, then I'm being responsible, and I'm safer if I worry than if I sit in this quiet place and relax. That's like going to be the end of me. So it's just like that kind of
Right.
scrambled thinking that again, how to get out of that knot. It's amazing that people find their way out. It can be so compelling. Um,
It is. And I wonder where I would be if I had not been exposed to the Enneagram, because it gave me so much understanding of the dynamics of my type, to know where to apply that lever, to
yeah,
know where to address the problem or attack the problem.
yeah, yeah. So the other thing that sometimes I've heard Sixes say is that they also do have a pretty skillful around anticipating real things that could go wrong, but it comes from a different place than worrying about everything. It's more of an intuitive, felt awareness that's just there as they relax their monkey mind. It's like this intuitive channel opens up for them where they anticipate, they can troubleshoot. There's a sense, an intuitive sense, along with the sharpness of their mind. Does that resonate for you? Anything like that?
I think that intuitive sense, that radar for things that could go wrong, is something I always had. And in the past, I would react to it in a fairly unconscious way.
Hmm.
And so I would get into that tangle of worrying, catastrophizing, perseverating, overthinking, tightening up. I think as I learned how to deal with the emotional, physical experience of anxiety, then I was able to get messages from that intuitive channel, but not interfere with them, not in react to them, not feel like I immediately needed to manage them in some way. So I feel like that channel was always there. It just needed to be unclogged. It needed to be able to run freely into a mind that wasn't going to freak out, a body that was going to be able to contain the arousal. And that's when the troubleshooting capacity really comes into its own, because we react to things, or I would say we respond to things in a much freer way. We don't build them into exaggerated, fantastical things that are way bigger than they really are. So I do believe it's a gift of the six that we always have that kind of radar.
Yeah,
And then the
yeah,
question is, can we listen to it clearly and respond to it cleanly?
yeah. Well, I think that's a really powerful discernment. What you just spoke. I'll have to write it down. That's a real keeper right there around, you know, having that intuitive sense, and then having a mind that doesn't, run all over it with fear patterns, but actually can, use the intuition and clearly discern without heightening, sort of like a type 4 heightening the horrible feelings, and the 6 heightening the possible outcomes. That working together of those two centers really gets clearer and more effective. So uh, yeah, powerful. I can remember Linda, who who I think you know,
Yes.
a type 6. We had finished doing a workshop in Atlanta, and she was taking me to the airport, and there was a lot of traffic. And I said to her, I'm starting to worry about whether I'm going to be late for my flight. And she said, don't worry. I know the exact minute when you should start to begin to worry. You can let go of it for now. I've already got that handled. I thought that was so funny. She just wasn't worried, but she knew there was a point. But yeah, so the other thing I noticed about her is that over time, when I first knew her, she had that nervous anxiety about her, and over time, she started getting more and more peaceful and grounded. Uh, and I often think of the 6 going to 9, and to that kind of peaceful, grounded place where I'm at ease in my own being, and I can relax and not be jumping all over the place in my head center. And I just wondered if you could say anything about your experience about you know how that going to 9, how you relate to that, if that's been a part of your thinking around your evolution.
Yeah, whether we see it as going to 9 or whether we see it as becoming free and more at home in our own
Yeah,
type, I'm
yeah,
not sure that matters very much.
yeah.
The experience, though, is as you just described it, it's an increasing ability to connect with a kind of fundamental faith that
Hmm.
things are okay in the sense that they are going to unfold the way they're going to unfold. And we can't manage that. We can't tailor the unfolding of reality to fit our needs and our moods. It's also a basic faith in myself,
Hmm.
basically, a faith that when something happens, I have the equipment to deal with it. Doesn't mean I will know exactly what needs to be done. It doesn't mean I can predict all the things that might happen. These are all the things that we do when we're trying to manage our anxiety and create a simulacrum of trust and faith in the world.
Hmm.
So when you start to realize something bad could happen, I might not know exactly what to do, but that's okay. I will do my best, and my best will not arise if I'm trying to manage it, predict it, reacting wildly to it. And a lot of 9s, when I explain that, say, yeah, duh. So, so it does seem to be something that I share with the 9
Yeah.
mind space.
Well, I think the other thing that occurs to me is that it seems like, you know, as you've done that inner work of being able to put attention on the sensation of anxiety and not go into full throttle catastrophizing, etc., that it seems like there's a kind of a quality of inner confidence that starts to arise in 6s. It's like a
Yeah.
quality, like a felt sense of my own being that I can trust. There's something really reliable in me. And sometimes we talk about it, in different circles, like I get in contact with my inner authority. But it seems like there's a qualitative sense of like a substance of confidence that I begin to feel in my core that I can rely on and trust and be okay with. Does that match some of your thinking or what you've experienced?
Yes. And I think that for we sixes, it is such hard-won confidence that
Hmm.
as we incrementally develop it, we know it's real. So it's a stable, solid, confident feeling.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, I'll be able to bullshit my way through that, or hey, I'm the bee's knees. My dad always told me so. I can do that. It's something that we've really worked very hard to cultivate. And
Yeah.
so there is that sense that we're able to have faith in it,
Yeah.
confidence in our own confidence, if you will.
Yeah. I like that. That's great. Yeah. And I've experienced is like it's palpable. I'm not just making this stuff up. There's a palpable something there that I can feel and be with and know myself that it's a part of my being. And it's hard to put words on, but that's what has occurred to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Sixes, are often described as fear types, and sixes I've worked with, even the most anxious ones, if there's an emergency, it's like they become a tiger. They're just like right there in the middle of the emergency, and they stand strong and they do these kind of heroic things out of the blue. I go, oh my God, where'd you get that courage? And then after the episode's over, they're shaking all over the place, going, I don't know what happened. How did I do it? If you were awesome. Man, you were so fearless and just clear about what needed to happen. And this happened, at Serenity House where I used to work with addictions folks, and somebody would show up who was in a raging alcoholic mode, and this little skinny type six would just suddenly just confront him, and the guy would just stop in his tracks and go, you know, okay, you're taking this too serious. I'm leaving now, and would walk away, and everybody else just like fearing for their life. And so I wondered, if that resonated with you and some of the experiences you might have had as a type six, that sense of when there's an emergency, maybe I don't have time for my anxiety. I just do the right thing, or my intuition just has a clear channel to go through. I mean, what's been true for you?
I think as a six, I spent much of my life, whether I wanted to or not, practicing and rehearsing for emergencies and catastrophes.
Oh,
And there is a sense, I think I worked for almost 20 years in a hospital on a psychiatric unit,
hmm,
and shit was always blowing up on the floor. And that feeling of, okay, this is what I trained for. And almost a relief of, okay, here's something commensurate to the energy that I bring to trying to choose what I'm going to eat for breakfast. And yet now I get to use it for something truly urgent. And so I do think there's that way that sixes can often be like the eye of the storm
hmm,
when things really do blow up. They're ready. They
yeah.
go into this zone kind of. So yes,
Well,
I do know that place.
well, I was just thinking of Riso Hudson's levels. The 9 levels, and the top one is something like the heroic crusader or the heroic pathfinder. And we often, this story gets told about how Samwise Gamgee, carrying Frodo to the wells, the mines of Mordor, and going through all sorts of hell, and just being a nervous and concerned helper, but also just, I'm gonna, my loyalty to Frodo, nothing will separate me. I can remember one scene in the movie where Frodo decided he was going to take the raft the rest of the way to Mordor, and he pushed off the shore, and Samwise spots him and comes running down the hill, and Frodo's about 50 yards out, and he says, "Samwise, I've got to go the rest of the way myself." And Samwise says, "Well, of course you do. That's why I'm coming with you." And he goes running into the water and sinks like a stone. And Frodo retrieved him and realized he wasn't getting rid of Samwise Gamgee anytime soon. So there's a kind of a loyalty, passion towards, and heroism towards something they committed to. So I wondered if that particular, Lord of the Rings was something that you identified with, because there was a lot of Type 6 heroism in it. And, anyway, just throwing it out as a possibility.
When I think of the Lord of the Rings, I think, in a way, I think more of Frodo's experience. And he is terribly frightened through much of this horrible journey. And to watch him growing into his sense of his role, his destiny, that's what really speaks to me as a dramatic portrayal of a 6 type energy really trying to stay the course, really learning, I am terrified and I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Well, I had read something where Tolkien had actually even though Frodo was sort of the hero, that Samwise he had written it with the idea that Samwise would end up being heralded as the one who's really the wind underneath Frodo's wings, but the two of them together certainly manifested all aspects of the 6, right? From Frodo getting paranoid and suspecting Sam, and you get the whole internal world, including the success at the end. So yeah. So I wonder, and you mentioned early on, just in passing around, self-sabotage, and sometimes 6s, that's one of the things that we learn about 6s, is that they can get right to the doorway of victory and then either forget that they have any value, or get scared and leave, and not sort of triumph or move forward. And I wondered how you had experienced self-sabotage, the 6 story.
Well, let me count the ways. The one that occurs to me right now, I'm thinking of when I went from college to graduate school, and I was in a very challenging program. And like a lot of 6s, I drank a lot to manage my anxiety. And when I got into graduate school and I had to work harder and with more clarity of mind than ever before, I drank even more. And there was part of me that, in a really bizarre way, was impressed with myself. How many people could go through Harvard graduate school and be an alcoholic at the same time? And I actually kind of reveled.
You surely deserved a reward.
I reveled in the challenge in a way. That was my experience of it at the time. Later, looking back on it, I saw how much of my behavior was a way of explaining my failure to myself in advance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, in this weird way, the scariest thing for me would to be to wholeheartedly commit myself to trying something and failing. So instead, why not hang a bunch of shackles around my neck, make it unreasonably hard, and then if I fail, I'll have an excuse. So I think for me, a fair amount of the self-sabotaging behavior was of that quality. And it
Hmm.
took me a while to gain the basic trust and confidence in myself to say, hey, you know what? I can really wholeheartedly try to achieve this. And if I fail, I fail. Took me a long time to see how important it was just to be able to accept the terms of that equation. I'm going to try, I might fail.
Hmm.
That didn't compute for a long time in my life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if that sounds deviously twisted and erotic, it is.
It's truly a good one. Yeah. Well, it's always interesting the ways that we unconsciously fool ourselves. So it's you know, the thing I appreciate in with sixes that they often, because they've seen themselves go through so many twists and turns, that they often have this lovely sense of humor, and appreciation and seeing the absurdity in things.
Yeah, I don't know how I would get through this life in my personality type if I didn't have the capacity to see the humor in it.
Yeah, very. In the Gurdjieff work, that's like one of the most important capacities, is to be able to laugh at yourself, because things are pretty laughable.
Yeah.
But I notice sixes just, and it's a kind of a compassionate humor too, because sixes have suffered a lot, and when they see people struggling in the way they did, there's often a lot of compassion. I know my dear friend Ron, he was hyper aware of when people were struggling with being worried and anxious, and he would do his best to calm them down, even though he was shaken and baking. So there's a kind of compassion for the
Hmm.
similar suffering. um, so is that something you
Yeah.
notice that you have a kind of a sharp eye on, is when people are starting to get overwhelmed with anxiety? Just, is that something that wakes you up?
Yeah, there's a little instrument inside me that just starts to vibrate when someone around me is vibrating with anxiety.
Ah.
And I think one of the gifts of sixes is often they're willing to offer up their own experience, to talk about their own anxieties, their own self-sabotage, their own neuroticism, as a way to help the other person see, okay, I'm not the only one that does this. Here's someone who now is in a calm state of mind, letting me know that they've been exactly as freaked out many times in their life as I have. So there's got to be something sane and safe on the other side of this experience.
Yeah.
And I do really like that quality of the sixes. Eight might empower someone by saying, lean on me, borrow my strength. you can do it. A 6 is more likely to say, here's my body, here's my blood, here's what it tastes like. It's like there's a certain, and I don't mean that in a grandiose sense.
Yeah.
I mean, like, they're really willing to share at a very intimate, painful level. Yeah, I've been here too.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a positive quality if you can get in touch with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always ironic. Well, not ironic, actually. It's uh, if you've gotten through some of that horrible suffering, it certainly seems natural to want to help people get through it a little quicker than I had to go through. But yeah, so it seems like the other thing I notice about sixes is they have a really sharp awareness of when somebody's acting too big for their britches, getting puffed up, and the sixes I've known have this. I often say that they could disarm Godzilla. They have a way of using humor and self-effacing comments about themselves to let the person inflated in their narcissism have a door out where they can kind of, let go of their ego and just almost say, thank you for popping my bubble. I don't know what came over me. I was just being an arrogant fool. But there's a kind of sixes I've seen them just go up and sort of poke somebody in the side going, you really think you're that important? I'm just wondering. And just have a way of disarming people. And what's been your experience?
I'd say my experience early on was that I would react quite negatively to anyone who I thought was being boastful or too big for their britches. And it offended me in a really special way. And I think it had to do with the fact that my own anxious self-loathing wouldn't really allow me to accept that there were times when someone felt full of themselves, right? I would say now it's one of the things that has really shifted. If I notice someone really becoming full of themselves like that, it doesn't personally bother me. I think it's kind of funny. And I was thinking about it as you were talking about it. I don't think that I go up and, prick the bubble. I think if anything, I sort of enjoy encouraging them to inflate it until it just blows up by itself. And that's not really in a malicious way.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that truly enjoys watching someone really become full of themselves. It's like, isn't that amazing? And I kind of get into it with them. But then at a certain point, it tends to it gets so big it explodes. But then it's usually a fairly, for the other person, I think, an experience that they can feel was completely their own. Nobody pricked my bubble,
Yeah.
It's more just, you'll see them start to turn like, hey, I mean, I'm actually not all that great, they'll start to talk themselves down, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's something I never really thought about until you just asked me, but that's feels like my experience of that now.
Yeah. Interesting.
I'm still usually pretty self-vigilant about doing anything that would perhaps make other people think I was getting too big for my britches. Like a couple of minutes ago, I was talking about sort of offering up my own flesh. And then I went, Jesus Christ, you comparing yourself to Jesus? So I had to Make sure no one thought I was doing that, right? So I get that little, grandiosity alarm, right?
Yeah,
Don't, don't let other people see it or hear it, right? It's more that. Don't
yeah.
let someone else catch you act, right?
Well, it's like calling yourself out before someone. So that's an interesting thing. Um, some of the sixes I've worked with, if I say to them, "Boy, you did just such an awesome job," they'll go, "Well, wait a second, you don't know the half of it," and they'll give me a historical review of every way they failed before they came to this success. So as if to say, I can't really take this all in right now. I have to balance it out with the fact that, I failed. And so whenever I, have offered a compliment, they always come back with the other side of it. It's like this, we want this balance. And it seems like they sometimes do that with folks who are caught up in their narcissism, as they want to bring the balance in. Like you want to see both sides. So there's kind
Mm.
of a quality of emotional honesty and kind of like telling the raw truth. Like I'm not that, I'm not all of that, but there's some good things about me. But this sometimes it's I just notice just that tendency to not rest in the positive for very long, for fear they'll catch the disease that the type 3 has from time to time. But I don't know what's been true for you around receiving compliments.
It's another thing where I would say the needle has moved over the last 20 years. I feel more able to take in and appreciate a compliment from someone. It's more like what I'm taking in is the other person's heartfelt desire to give me the compliment. So I'm less concerned that I whittle it down and let him know all the unseen things that would undo the compliment. I'm not as concerned with it as a completely accurate statement of reality. It's more I feel, isn't it great this person wants to say that, to
Hmm.
give me that gift?
Hmm.
So I think I'm a lot more comfortable saying, "Hey, I appreciate you saying that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which also, when I say I appreciate you saying that, you notice I'm not signing on that I actually agree with it completely. I'm just saying I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
is that part of me that still wants to be honest, right?
Yeah. 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 Well, so you know, since we went through the training together back in 2006 and seven, few years have passed, and just wondered, if you would say a little bit about your kind of inner journey, what sort of inspired you in terms of, what you love and also spiritual ideas that have been meaningful to you. If you could share a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the very first workshop that I went to where I met Russ Hudson was a workshop on the holy ideas. It's also where I met Katie, my wife, who you know well.
Hmm.
And I sat down to dinner across from him the first night. And I said something like, I feel some powerful spiritual mojo coming from you, Russ. And I'm interested. What is your practice, aside from the Enneagram?
Hmm.
And he told me about the diamond approach, just in a sentence. And so I immediately sought out the diamond approach, joined a group, which I was in for 10 years.
Oh,
that was an enormously important part. And as you know, if you read Don and Russ's work, the diamond approach fingerprints are all over the way they articulate
Yeah.
the work of
Yeah.
the Enneagram. And then a little bit further down the road, partly because of its influence in the diamond approach work, I started to read the Gurdjieff literature, Gurdjieff's own writings, writings of his students. And that's been hugely helpful. I'm reading a book right now by Henri Tracol, and he was a student of John de Salzman's first, and then was one of Gurdjieff's students in the 40s after the period of the Priory, when he had that apartment in Paris and would have these gatherings in his apartment. And the delicacy of the way someone like Tracol writes about inner work, always, whenever he answers a question, seeing all of the ways that what he says could be reified or turned into philosophizing or metaphysical speculation, constantly listening to him give an answer to a question is like watching an Aikido master, you know, escaping all of the possible ways that his answer could be misunderstood. And so he's just a great example of what I think is so powerful about the Gurdjieff work, is that there is no answer that's anywhere near as important as staying in front of a powerful question.
Yeah. 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 That's of course, I've been in the Gurdjieff work for quite a while, and whenever I try to extricate an answer, it's not going to happen. They'll say, well, you need to go find out. And as they would say, says, we're all equals here. It's only your earned understanding that's going to have value for you. I can tell you the answer, but it doesn't give you what your soul hungers for. So go research it. Tell me what you discover. That's powerful, because people come to workshops and they want answers, and one thing my teacher would say: if you really want to put somebody to sleep, give them the answers. You'll just
That's
see their
right.
eyes glaze over, and they'll be gone, right? So
That's right.
yeah.
And for me, it's been so important to continually bring that energy back into my relationship with the Enneagram, because I think one of the great dangers of the Enneagram is that we approach it as a series of answers and explanations and labels.
Absolutely.
And I think that much more powerfully, the Enneagram helps us to keep a very precise set of questions about ourselves in front of our attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that's been my feeling too, which is I often say, don't believe anything about this structure, but find out for yourself what's true. You can say I'm a 4 and then stop inquiring or stop observing who you are and get caught in this kind of tunnel where you miss reality because you're so busy in your 4-ness thinking about 4-ness and I'm a 4 that you become blind. You're no longer using the tool, and now it's just something that's in your head center that you go to refer to who you are and what you're about. But the Enneagram isn't about memorizing all the types and then being able to pull out the answer cards. And it's a living. I often say we've started to understand it, but we're probably 30% there, or maybe 20. There's just so much more to be revealed. And I think And that to me, one of the things that Bennett often said when he was getting ready to explore something is saying, we're going to explore this as if we really don't know what's true. That way,
Mhm.
we might bring something in that has value and freshness and a new opening of understanding. And his work was always to just be going in saying, okay, well, we don't really know what this is. There's a story about it. Let's see what we discover. And I think that's, you know, similar to what you're saying is that people get lost in the dogma of the story and they're always it's like sometimes I feel like I'm at an essence sale where people are coming in going, I've got the real essence answer. Come to my workshop. Oh no, I've discovered how these things work. Come to my workshop. And it's like, oh my word, it's become a shopping mall sometimes. So, that's human beings doing what they do. It's not a bad thing. I just have to be aware of it. So does that any of that resonate for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
When I'm at a, say, Enneagram workshop, milling around with people, whenever anyone says, well, as a seven, I always like to, I just feel my heart sink to my feet, because I know I'm talking to someone who has started to experience themselves through a secondhand definition of what
Yeah.
they think they are.
Yeah.
And how do you experience in an open, curious way what's really true for you in the moment when you're always applying this template or stencil to yourself
Yeah.
and then trying to speak from that place?
Yeah.
As you say, it's completely natural. There's never been a system or a religion or a philosophy that wasn't turned to that purpose by the ingenuity of the human ego. But it's very important to try to continually catch ourselves doing it
Yeah.
and to wake up from it in that moment.
Yeah. It's I often say, if you learn about your type and it inspires you to start to observe yourself objectively and really develop a practice, then it's done its job. You can even sort of drop all the definitions and just begin that inquiry to see what's so about you, what happens to you. And you may notice it fits the four, or you may notice there's a mystery, it doesn't fit anywhere. Oh, that's interesting to know. Because the tendency can be like, I got to crowd it into the four. You see, I go to one. How does that fit to the one? And then to the two, the missing point. How does that fit? I'm going, you have just left the playing field. You're no longer here anymore. You're in
Yes.
your head center doing a dance. So, but it's compelling. But anyway, I'm always, one of the things that always strikes me as funny is I'll be at a Enneagram workshop and I might say, well, how many people here actually have a practice? Maybe I got 40 people, where you sit or you do some kind of, observation of the centers and if, maybe 5% raise their hand. And I'm going, wow. Well, the point of this is to get you to something that helps you develop that kind of awareness, that objective awareness of yourself so that you begin to discover something deeper, which is, where all the jewels are. So anyway, again, it's human nature to collect the information and then go off and do it someplace else. Um, so now I'm starting to ramble a little bit. That's okay. So tell me, if you were, and this is a hard one. When somebody asks me this, I go, next question. But anything that stands out to you as a kind of guidance for the type six, who are struggling with their patterns and, things what you'd want to say to encourage and help them to keep the faith. And besides, find a Samwise Gamgee to take you to the mines of Mordor. Um, Anything come to mind for you around support for people in their recovery from their sickness?
Let's see. I don't know if this is really specifically or even more true for sixes than for anybody, but it's been true for me. And so I will share this. One of the most important, and I can say there are a lot of ways in which this could be challenging for the six. So maybe it is good specifically for the six. In my practice, I have found over and over again that if I trust my own curiosity and creativity, so someone may say, you'll never get anywhere unless you have a stable sitting practice where you sit on a cushion and meditate for at least 20 minutes a day. To go, is that true? Let's find out. What does it mean for me to have a mindfulness practice in my life? Does it necessarily take that form? There's all kinds of proclamations and pronunciations being made all the time about what you need to do and how you need to do it in order to get down the path, right?
Yeah.
And I have really found that over and over again, it's the thing that I come up with myself
Mm.
that seems to work for me that actually gets me further down the path.
Mm.
So, if it's true that sixes want authority and they want a set of rules, I'm not sure that that's as true as it's often sold as
Yes.
being.
Yep.
Then this could be a good message in particular for sixes, but I also think it's a good message for anybody. Find your own way.
Yeah.
Teachers are great, books are great, systems are great, but don't expect any of that to do your work for you.
Yeah.
And enjoy how fun it can be
Mm.
to be curious and creative
Mm.
and say, hey, what if I decide to try to have a daily, consistent, deep practice of mindfulness that doesn't look like the yogi sitting on the cushion? What would that be like?
Mm.
And then also to be able to say, this isn't working. Maybe I should reassess.
Mm.
So to be able to constantly do that as well.
Mm. Yeah.
But I really do think that it's wonderful and supportive to be in a community. And God knows I read all the time to keep close to the wisdom of people smarter and wiser than me.
Mm.
And yet, the practice is also something that each individual person has to do for themselves their own way and to find out moment by moment, day by day, what that day is,
Mm.
what that way is.
Yeah.
Because that can be changing all the time. What worked for me last week isn't working anymore. That's okay. I wonder why. Where should I go now?
Yeah, I really appreciate that message. It mirrors a lot of what I've learned in the Gurdjieff work, which is first off, believe nothing. Believe nothing that you hear here. Find out. Do your own experiment. Of course, in the Gurdjieff work, we have a new practice every week. Who knew that there were 5,000 possible practices, which we're encouraged to try on and see what is it that wakes you up? What is it? And for how long? Maybe it's only 3 weeks that particular exercise worked. That's not a problem. Here's another one. So it's like so experimental in that way. And and there's so much wisdom in that because everybody wakes up differently, And some people, sitting 30 minutes a day might be the worst thing they could ever do for themselves. They just sort of go into their associations in their head for 30 minutes and come out. And for others, what they often say in the Gurdjieff work is it's quality, not quantity. If you sit presently for 3 minutes with full attention, you get something. It's not how long you do it. So anyway, I think these are all really powerful ideas, because I think it's people have a tendency, being human, that whatever wakes them up, they think it'll wake everybody else up too. So come do my program, right? And it's meant for good reasons, but it's important. What do we say? Buyer beware. That learn to trust your own intuition. So
Yeah.
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 Well, anything else you might want to share before we? One thing I heard at the beginning was that importance for having relationships where you feel like I've got your back and you've got my back, and you speak the truth and I speak the truth. And that seemed to me also to capture some of the, really healthy aspects of the six. It's almost like the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. And there's this, you know, uh, cooperative effort that's honest and forthright. But I wondered if you could say anything more about that.
I think it's another example of a need that sixes recognize to some degree at all levels of health and functioning. So when I first became aware of what my type 6 needed, I think I worked a lot to figure out how to get other people to give me the sense that I could depend on them and trust them and that my environment was safe. I'm not sure I fully realized in the beginning that equally important was that I develop and cultivate the capacity to trust myself, to follow through, to be that same trustworthy, dependable person for the other person. So I think as you work this path, you start to realize more and more your own personal active role in what it means to feel safe, to feel like you are in an environment that's supportive and dependable. And that's where the reciprocal nature is so important. So I think I've become more and more willing to pay attention to how much I'm contributing.
Hmm.
So if I feel, for example, as I often did in the past working in the hospital, that some of my coworkers were shirking, not carrying their weight, whatever unsupported feeling I had,
Mhm.
I would tend to subtly punish them as a way to try to wake them up. And it wasn't working. And a few years into really seeing how much I suffered at work in this environment, very much like a wartime environment where everyone really needs to pull as a team. One person who shirks or doesn't pay attention truly endangers everybody. It was that kind of environment on a acute psych ward. So a few years into wrestling with this and feeling like whatever I'm doing, it's not working, I decided to try an experiment. What if, to the extent that I feel like someone is trying to shirk their job, I offer to shoulder part of it for them? What if I actually pay the most attention to and offer most help to the people that I think are the most letting me down, letting the team down.
Mm.
And amazingly, that worked. I realized that often people who I might think were trying to not shoulder their load, trying to shirk their work, in their own minds felt tremendously unsupported by the world.
Mm.
And they were trying to help themselves by making their lot feel a little easier.
Interesting.
I know, right? I
That's
hadn't
wild.
thought of that when I was caught up in a me against them.
Yeah.
I need to train them. I need to punish them a little bit. I need to make them feel my pain, that kind of thing, right? I realized that once I started just offering to do things for them, they felt supported and they would turn around and be much more helpful, much more engaged. They seemed to have felt a ground of support under them they hadn't felt before, which allowed them to show up fully in a way that they hadn't before. So, this is a complicated variant on the you attract more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? But
It's the advanced course.
it's a very six specific
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So that was a huge learning for me.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. That's quite a gift, that story. And uh, getting out of the role of you against them, and and finding, in a sense, it's almost like third force was to say, well, I will, I'll help them out. They And I'll stop my story about them and I'll just go do it. And something else happened. So
It's interesting you put it in those terms because I have found that third force often has that really surprising, out of left field, counterintuitive quality
yeah,
to it.
yeah,
And so for me to say, these people are walking all over me. What if I let them walk over me more?
yeah. I will help them.
And
And then
since you mentioned the three forces, I think that's an example of when we take what we perceive as second force, that thing that's getting in our way,
yeah,
and we open up with a kind of receptivity of like, well, what's good in there? What's usable in there?
hmm,
And we stop fighting it,
yeah,
first force against second force. I think
yeah,
there's a huge part of the law of three where to become receptive to what second force actually might have to offer often is what pulls third force into the field.
yeah. Well, this is one of our has been one of our favorite topics recently. Is that the second force is lawful. It's needed. It's not something that's bad. And we have it in ourselves. Like, if you get a say, I'm going to take on this job, I want to do this job well, and then we notice, oh, there's another character inside of me who wants nothing to do with it, that wants to sit on the couch, or drink, or go shop addictively. And so it's like, well, that second force is there for a reason. It's not a bad thing. It's just how it's lawful. So how do you work with it? Do you befriend it? Do you recognize there it is? It's a magnetic pull. Oh, how can I work with that force to bring in a reconciling energy that allows me not to uh, go down, go in the wrong direction? But there's something around just honoring. There's always, in anything we wish to do, there's always the oppositional force. It's as Gurdjieff would say, it's lawful. And if you notice it, you get to work with it and not be against it, and get mad at it, and whether it's a person or whether it's something inside myself. So, and then that magical thing is like, who would have known that something would come. I mean, it comes, often in the work, to say you can't see third force, it arrives, something comes
Right.
through. So anyway, it's a great example of that. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that language in because I hadn't thought of this in those terms, but I think you're absolutely right. The other thing I think that is so amazing about the law of three is I think what allows us to notice and honor the lawfulness of second force is itself third force.
Yes.
I think in a really mysterious way, third force is there in some way to enable itself to arise in the field.
Mm, mm,
And that's the part that's sort of like grace. We can't really control it,
yeah.
but through more and more practice, we can make it more likely that we'll be in that place where we can recognize it and respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, well, this will be a subject of our next interview when we
There you
do,
go.
because this is such juicy stuff and powerful, important stuff. So yeah. Well, look, why don't we stop from here? And thank you so much for your time and your insights. It just
Oh, enjoyed it
yeah,
fully.
yeah, me too. It's just a pleasure. And my hope is that we're down the road we can continue this kind of well, I wouldn't call it higher, but expansive look at all of these dynamics that are such a part of our lives. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, look, there's many blessings to you, and just a pleasure to be with you. And it's just so awesome to have men in my life who have such a beautiful soul and spirit. And part of my work is to let people know there's a lot of really beautiful men around, and that sometimes we forget to look and notice them. So that's part of my hope here, is just to have more conversations with lovely people like yourself. So I'm gonna turn our recording off, and then we can talk more. And yes, many blessings to you.